Ukrainian sovereignty and economic pressure on Russia, but also what Sir Keir called a coalition of the willing. Countries that would work with Ukraine.
That the way forward in Ukraine is not to continue to give them a bucket load of money and let them waste it all and just fire missiles at the Russians to no avail because the Russians have taken 20% of their land.
Be part of some sort of peacekeeping force. Now, here are some of the European NATO leaders at the weekend. It's all happy families, but how many of this group are actually willing?
We spoke a lot about Keir Starmer and his coalition of the willing. It looks as though the coalition of the willing has now gone down the gurgler because Donald Trump's just gone, well, I don't know what you people are talking about. We're not doing that.
Last week, I spoke with Martin, a dairy farmer from Yorkshire who's been in the business for 30 years. I've never seen it this bad, he told me, his voice breaking. The new agricultural policies are destroying us, while the government sends billions overseas that could save British farms. Martin's story isn't unique. Across Britain, ordinary citizens are bearing the brunt of a £22 billion financial shortfall, while Starmer defends sending endless funding to Ukraine. The disconnect between Westminster's priorities and the reality on British streets has never been more stark. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. What if I told you the government's black hole could swallow your family's financial future whole? Keir Starmer has repeatedly claimed to have inherited a £22 billion financial shortfall from the previous Conservative government. Yet this convenient narrative falls apart under scrutiny, while ordinary Britons are left facing the brutal consequences of economic mismanagement. In Parliament, Starmer has mastered the art of deflection.
Well, the makeup of the coalition is something that Keir Starmer is keeping fairly quiet about because it's an evolving initiative. It definitely includes the United Kingdom and France because it's their idea.
Quite what that collection of beanbag politicians from Europe thought they would achieve by getting together on Sunday.
Yeah.
And it likely also includes Italy and Canada and maybe the Netherlands and perhaps the small Baltic states. But beyond that, it's pretty uncertain. Spain has ruled out participation.
Beyond me.
They all fancy a trip to London, I suspect.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah.
But anybody with any semblance of grey matter.
When pressed about the dire economic situation, he pivots to vague platitudes about turning things around and economic stability. But let's be clear, these empty words won't pay your rising energy bills or reduce the crushing burden of taxation that's suffocating British families and businesses. The evidence directly contradicts Starmer's rosy picture of economic recovery. Inflation continues to erode purchasing power, with essential goods price increases outpacing wage growth. The OBR's own projections show stagnant growth despite Starmer's claims of economic revival. Meanwhile, the government has introduced 17 new tax rises that will extract an additional £40 billion from British pockets, the highest tax burden in 70 years. This economic squeeze isn't just affecting family budgets. Britain's vital services are collapsing under the weight of financial neglect. NHS waiting lists remain at record levels. Social care is in crisis, and local councils are cutting essential services while raising council tax. Small businesses, the backbone of our communities, are buckling under increased national insurance contributions and regulatory costs. The disconnect between Westminster's economic fantasy and ground-level reality couldn't be more stark. While Starmer boasts about economic turnarounds in Parliament, protests have erupted across Britain. Nowhere is this more evident than among British farmers, who have become the canaries in the coal mine of economic mismanagement. Farmers are taking to the streets because Starmer's government has systematically undermined their livelihoods through punitive inheritance taxes, removal of agricultural relief, and environmental regulations without adequate support. One Yorkshire farmer told me, "We can barely afford to feed our livestock while watching the government send billions abroad. Are British farms less important than foreign wars?"
Germany cannot agree to such a commitment when it's in between chancellors. Poland has a pretty big army, but is clearly nervous that if it deploys a proportion of its forces to Ukraine,
between their ears, knows that this matter will only be resolved with some input from America.
Exactly.
Donald Trump.
And with America leading the way, frankly.
to declare any future Russian aggression attack elsewhere in the north. So the UK will be a key participant. But of its available forces, there would likely be only about, say, 5,000 on the ground.
So it's all wishful thinking, grandstanding,
and virtue signalling.
Of course, of which so many of those European politicians got PhDs in virtue signaling.
This farmer's question cuts to the heart of the issue. While British agriculture, which feeds our nation and sustains our countryside, faces an existential threat, Starmer's government has prioritised international commitments over domestic needs. The agricultural sector, which contributes £120 billion to our economy and employs 4 million people, is being sacrificed on the altar of misplaced priorities. That Yorkshire farmer's cry echoes a profound betrayal unfolding across Britain. While domestic industries wither, over £6 billion has been dispatched to Ukraine with remarkable efficiency. This staggering sum isn't just numbers on a ledger. It represents political choices with real consequences for British citizens watching their own needs neglected. When pressed in Parliament about this stark contrast, Starmer's response reveals volumes about his government's true priorities. Rather than addressing the painful trade-offs facing British families, he pivots to vague assurances about economic security alongside national security. This rhetorical sleight of hand attempts to disguise an uncomfortable truth. Resources committed abroad are resources unavailable at home. The speed differential tells the most damning story. Ukrainian aid packages sail through approval processes in days, while domestic funding requests languish for months in bureaucratic purgatory. Communities devastated by flooding wait endlessly for relief. Schools with crumbling infrastructure are told to make do. Hospitals struggle with inadequate resources, while billions flow eastward with astonishing urgency. In town halls across Britain, the sentiment is turning increasingly bitter. They've forgotten who they work for, said one Yorkshire community leader at a recent public meeting. We're told there's no money for fixing our roads or supporting our elderly, yet they find billions overnight when it suits their international agenda. These voices aren't opposing Ukrainian aid in principle. They're questioning a government that seems more responsive
at any one time. And there needs to be 3 times as many troops to be available for whatever number is deployed. So, depending on the involvement, the RAF could play a part.
They'd never heard of a peace deal for Ukraine. Suddenly now they want one.
Yeah, exactly.
3 weeks ago.
Let's rewind a couple of months before Donald Trump had taken office for the second time.
And they'd be working very, very hard. Now, France has more than 110,000 troops, but again, nowhere near that number would be deployed, and they still need 3 times as many as however many they have on the ground.
Nobody was speaking in terms of peace. No one, not a soul, not a politician,
not a sausage,
anywhere.
Bugger all, you might say.
Yeah. So,
to international pressure than domestic suffering, Starmer's administration has crafted a false choice narrative, suggesting Britain must either abandon Ukraine or neglect domestic needs. This framing insults the intelligence of the electorate. The real issue isn't whether to help Ukraine, but whether the government is being transparent about the trade-offs inherent in these massive financial commitments. Every pound sent abroad represents not just financial resources, but political capital that could address the mounting crises at home. The billions committed to Ukraine don't exist in isolation from Britain's £22 billion financial challenges. Yet when questioned directly about this connection, ministers retreat into platitudes about global stability rather than acknowledging the domestic sacrifice. This deliberate obfuscation prevents meaningful public discourse about national priorities and shields the government from accountability for its choices. The real scandal isn't just the financial black hole, it's the accountability void swallowing British democracy whole. History shows successful governments have balanced international commitments with domestic priorities during times of crisis. Post-war administrations rebuilt economies while maintaining crucial alliances, proving that responsible leadership requires both. Yet today, what we're witnessing is a masterclass in misdirection. While Starmer's government points fingers and hides behind spreadsheets, British families face impossible choices at their kitchen tables. The path forward demands more than clever parliamentary performances or technical economic jargon. Martin from Yorkshire doesn't need political theory. He needs a government that remembers its first duty is to its citizens. When politicians measure success by international standing rather than domestic stability, they've forgotten the fundamental contract between government and governed. The ultimate test test of Starmer's leadership won't be found in diplomatic praise or international treaties, but in whether ordinary Britons can trust him to put their interests first when making difficult spending decisions.